These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, what a remarkable night last night. The Sturm und Drang, the fear and loathing was just rolling across the screen. I'm going to get into that in just a minute. Later on in our program, in our second hour, Dan Partland has produced a new movie called Unfit, about the psychology of Donald Trump. He'll be with us to talk about it. Sarah Blaskey has a new book out about basically the entire Republican Party. It's called The Grifters Club. Kevin Patel will be here talking about how the wildfires are changing our weather, not the other way around, and Bradley Marshall about the bomb trains. So that in our third hour. So a lot going on today. But you know, I want to start out with last night's Republican convention. It struck me that what we were watching was the Nixon 1968 playbook being repeated. You know, Roger Stone was advising Nixon, I believe, in 68. I know he was certainly advising him by 72. And, you know, Nixon's main pitch to Americans in 68 was America's on fire. Martin Luther King had been murdered a few months earlier, and there were riots across our cities. And, you know, lots and lots of footage on TV of black people rioting. And of course, that was the stuff that Nixon was using to crank up white voters. And I was just seeing the same thing last night. And it seems to me, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Number one, what your experience of watching last night was. There were a few moments, particularly early on, where I was thinking, some of this rhetoric actually is about things that are good and noble about America, some of our aspirations and goals. I'm not sure that they're unique to, in fact, I'm quite sure that they're not unique to the Republican Party. But, there was some kind of Reagan-esque rhetoric. But that was the thing about Reagan, is he cloaked brutal policies that just made rich people richer and richer and richer and crushed working people, destroyed their unions, destroyed their ability to have, any kind of equity in the workplace. He couched all of those just vicious policies, not to mention his vicious racism, in soaring rhetoric. He had really good speechwriters. And we saw some of that last night, but then it kind of devolved into warnings, fear and hysteria and demagoguery. I mean, the biggest fear seemed to be that black people are going to move into your white suburb. They have this couple on who, Black Lives Matter folks were marching to somebody else's house. They walked by the front of these people's house. Now, I know Fox News has put together this montage showing the metal gate to the community in which they live, which used to be a gated community. That metal gate fell apart a decade ago or so and just kind of, lays there next to the giant stone pillars that are the entrance to the community. But they shot pictures of it, kind of implying that these people had crashed a gate in front of these folks' house. No, they hadn't. It had nothing to do with these people's house. So Fox News put together this montage, which they played again last night. As if these people's house was under attack or they weren't. The reason that they were charged by the police with threatening is that they stood on their porch and they pointed their guns at people with their fingers on the trigger. That's against the law. But, this was their big fear. Oh my God, they mentioned suburbs. And Trump is tweeting, and Cory Booker is going to be in charge of it. Who's Cory Booker? Oh yeah, that black senator from New Jersey. And then right behind that was their terror that the Democrats are going to raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires and use that money to pay for health care for low-income people, especially black low-income people. And, finally they kept pointing to this, I put it in quotes, scare quotes, violence here in Portland. Now, I don't know any reasonable person who thinks that setting fire to things and damaging and defacing buildings is in any way productive. John Lewis was right. Martin Luther King was right. Peaceful protest is how you get the best results. Mahatma Gandhi was right. And the people in some of our cities who are burning things down, they're just wrong. It feeds the narrative that Trump wants. They are making Donald Trump's television ads. I get it. People are really upset. There's terrible stuff going on. We have, another fellow here, Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back in Kenosha, Wisconsin, day before yesterday. And now we learn that he's paralyzed in the waist down. It's outrageous. This is criminal. So by all means, get in the streets and protest this. But the message from Trump was that anybody who is protesting is also violent, which is a lie. We know that 99.9% of all the people who've shown up for all these protests have been totally peaceful. Black, white, everything in between, it doesn't matter. But I can't tell you how many times I heard the word Portland. Maybe I'm sensitive to it because I live here, but it was like, oh yeah, okay. And who provoked that violence? Everything was settling down here in Portland after the George Floyd murder protests. Everything was just kind of calming down, winding down, and then Trump sends in the stormtroopers. But sadly, I think the thing that was saddest to me was the commentary afterwards, where the media was treating Trump in this weird parade of supplicants and family members, which reminds me of Donald Trump Jr., with his wild, bloodshot eyes, My guess is that he was just, wearing contacts that didn't work well for reading the prompter at that distance. But, there are people who think he was snorting cocaine or he's got COVID or God only knows what. But, it was totally strange. But here was this parade of grifters and family members and all this kind of stuff that were basically treated by the media as if it was some sort of aberration. Oh, the Republican Party would never be like this. I remember a Republican Party that's been like this my entire life. This is what Nixon campaigned on in '68. Racialized fear. This is what Ronald Reagan campaigned on when the first speech he gave of his official presidential campaign was at the Nebosha County Fair in near Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers were murdered, speaking to an all-white crowd, talking about states' rights. A scene that Donald Trump Jr. repeated in 2016, saying he was very proud that his first speech was right here at this county fair where Ronald Reagan gave his first speech. And he talked about, to an all-white crowd about states' rights too. I mean, Trump is making it clear that when he says law and order, he's talking about black people. Nixon didn't come right out and say that. But, we figured out what he was talking about. Trump is talking about voter fraud, and we've known since Reagan that meant stop Democrats from voting, particularly, people of color and older voters who might vote Social Security and Medicare. Trump has openly called for the destruction of Social Security within 3 years. If the tax suspension of the Social Security Trust Fund tax that Trump has proposed goes into effect and lasts for 3 years, no more Social Security. And this is what Trump is promoting. And his party loves it. This is not a new party. This isn't the Trump party. This is the Republican Party of old. They've been fighting Social Security ever since it was passed in 1935. I mean, I think the good news is that Americans are waking up to this scam that Republicans have been running. People say, oh, Trump is so much worse. He's talking about staying in office beyond 8 years. Well, yeah, talk is cheap. Trump is just saying out loud the stuff that Nixon and Reagan and Bush and Cheney were saying in code. Or do you think that this actually is dramatically different? I see this as the logical endpoint of the GOP.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I have been warning for years that if the Republican Party keeps going down the road that Ronald Reagan put it on, there won't be a democracy left in this republic. And welcome back. John in Raymore, Missouri. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Tom. A quick point from a former postal employee about the attack on the post office. This is something I think the defenders of the post office should make use of, or should have been making use of. So I went online, postal site, the website of the post office says that the average daily mail is about 472 million pieces. So then in 2016, about 160 million people voted. Let's say more votes this year. Let's say half vote by mail, 100 million. Say it's all in 5 days. That's 20 million a day. That's a 4% increase. That's nothing. But my other point as a former letter.
Well, that was the point DeJoy made a couple days ago. He said this is not a big deal. We can easily handle this. But apparently they can't easily handle anything. I mean, mail has slowed down all over the country, and we've got the internal postal service documents to prove it.
The only other thing I wanted to throw in as a postal employee is that what happened constantly was that the regular carrier, a senior carrier, would put aside all the trays of junk mail on their days, and then on the day off, the sub would deliver double mail. So they could easily put aside junk mail during that period. Anyway, I guess I'm off the air already. Thank you.
No, you're not. You're still on here, John.
Oh,
so
right.
I don't understand the point you're making. What's the therefore of what you called to say?
Well, I'm saying that defenders of the post office should be pointing out from the beginning that this was a fake argument that the post office couldn't handle, the slight increase.
Oh, that Trump is making?
Yeah,
I don't think Trump's argument is that the post office can't handle it. I think Trump's argument is that when a state, as several states have done now, mails out a ballot or even an application for a ballot to everybody on their roll, on their voter rolls, they are going to get some people who are dead, and they are going to get some people who have moved. In other words, people who are, to whom those ballots shouldn't be going. And in the Republican world, they're convinced that people are going to gather those ballots up. In other words, if my dead father got a ballot and it came to my home, I would take that ballot and vote it. And that leap is not being revealed by the media. That's the logical leap Republicans are making. If I got a ballot addressed to my dad, I wouldn't vote it because I would know that I would be facing a couple years in prison if I voted it. I mean, it's just, states are going to be sending out ballots to people who are dead and don't live there anymore. But people are not voting those ballots. There is no voter fraud being done that way. But that's what Trump is suggesting.
Anyway, that was just a tidbit to throw into the pot.
Okay, thanks a lot, John. Good to hear from you. And nice to hear from somebody who knows what they're talking about. Former postal employees. Most of us are kind of blithering in the dark here when it comes to the nuance of the post office. But watching that convention last night, I was just struck by how over the top it all is. Particularly Kimberly Guilfoyle. I tweeted out this morning, I preferred the original done by Leni Riefenstahl. It's called Triumph of the Will. If you haven't seen it, it's actually brilliant cinematography. It's about Hitler's 1937 Nuremberg rally. And every theater in Germany was required to play that before every movie, right up until the end of the war. Anyhow, 20 minutes past the hour. I'll be right back. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. My new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. American monopolies dominate, control, and consume most of the energy of our entire economic system. They function the same as cancer does in a body, and like cancer, they weaken our systems while threatening to crash the entire body economic. American monopolies have also seized massive political power and use it to maintain their obscene profits and CEO salaries while crushing small competitors. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, quote, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series. Available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. So were you able to bring yourself to watch the convention last night, the Republican convention? I thought it was fascinating. It was horrifying in some regards. I tweeted today that I preferred the original version as done by Leni Riefenstahl. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, well, Google it. Anyhow, poison control in Texas. This is just amazing. The North Texas Poison Control Center has contacted the media across North Texas because this one poison control center in one part of the state, this is up in the Panhandle, in this one part of the state, or whatever they call that, northern part of Texas, has had 46 cases of people who have drank bleach because they thought that it would help them avoid getting or heal from the coronavirus because of Donald Trump. 46 cases in this one little region of Texas. Drinking bleach, by the way, produces severe vomiting, severe diarrhea, life-threatening low blood pressure caused by dehydration, and acute liver failure. The agency said, this is amazing. a poison control agency has to issue this public, formal warning to the TV and radio stations in North Texas, quote, "Stop, it won't cure COVID." Really? Yesterday, the head of the FDA, Dr. Stephen Hahn, really blew it with regard to convalescent plasma. This is the transparent or the clear part of blood that is extracted from people who donate blood. You can get your red blood cells back if you want, the platelets. And it has some of the antiviral antibodies that the body produces in response to the coronavirus. And it turns out that if within 3 days of being diagnosed with COVID, you are given an injection of this convalescent plasma, your risk of dying drops down to roughly 8%. So I think it was 7.9% risk of dying, that point forward, if you're in the hospital and you're given this convalescent plasma. Whereas if it's given on the 4th day after diagnosis, or the 5th day, or any day after the 4th day, that risk of dying increases to almost 12%, 11 point something. And so what this means is that if you get this convalescent plasma in less than 3 days, you have a 35% lower chance of dying than if you get it more than 3 days out. In other words, your chance of dying goes from 11 and almost 12% to almost 8%. But the head of the FDA went on TV and said, well, this means that out of 100 people who get COVID, 35 of them will survive who wouldn't have survived otherwise. But that's not the case at all. So, he's apologizing for this. But last night I kept hearing this 35% number, and Donald Trump is saving us. And no, and by the way, his making it available by emergency authorization was meaningless. Over 100,000 people in America have already gotten convalescent plasma. It's being widely used. The problem is that it's being widely used in some controlled studies where some people get it, other people don't, so we can find out exactly how well it works, or some people get it and other people are using, like these anti-inflammatory steroids, or, there are other compounds that they found that have some minimal effect with people with COVID, and so they're comparing them. Well, all those studies are going to get thrown into the trash bin yesterday because the CDC said, oh, well, anybody can prescribe this. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is actively trying to take away health care from millions of Americans in the middle of a pandemic. They've renewed their push for block granting Medicaid. Medicaid is the health insurance that is given to people who are working but don't make enough money to qualify for Obamacare in some states. And Trump, it has never been capped in its 55-year history. Trump wants to cap it with block grants. So once a state has spent a certain amount of money, no matter how many people are sick with COVID, no matter how many people are in the hospital, doesn't matter, that state can't have any more Medicaid money. Therefore, those people on Medicaid can't get any more treatments. Plus, they're continuing to argue before the Supreme Court. John Roberts cut them a favor and said, we won't issue a decision until after the election. But the Trump administration and the Republican Party and attorneys general, states attorneys general for 20 Republican-controlled states are continuing to argue before the United States Supreme Court that the Affordable Care Act should be blown up and that insurance companies should be able to go back to having lifetime limits and pre-existing condition exclusions and things like that during a pandemic. I didn't hear anything about that last night. Meanwhile, a black Army veteran, young woman, wanted to go to a Back the Blue rally to support the police. She's a pro-police Army vet, and so she shows up at this Back the Blue rally in Sodus, New York, to say, I'm with you guys. And they took one look at the color of her skin and started screaming the N-word at her. These people are nuts. So what did you think of last night? We'll be back with your calls.
Call 202-808-9925.
And of course, we can talk about the post office and Medicare and, anything's related to all of this. Well, stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies. Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles. Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in some, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word, former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. Ethan Manuel with Sierra Club's Land Protection Program is here on Trump greenlighting drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Will the oil companies show up? Adrian Shelley with Public Citizen is dropping by on the methane rule rollback and the Trump administration's continued assault on our climate. Lori Lodes with Climate Power 2020 is excited about Biden and Harris painting a bold climate action plan with clean energy jobs. Plus, in geeky science, there's a new study out. Do plant-based meats improve your heart? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, reading this very, very sad and bizarre story of Jerry Falwell Jr. and his wife and their pool boy. I think one of the interesting things they say in May of 2015, Falwell offered to buy out the pool boy. He had set him up with a business in Florida, a youth hostel or something like that, and. You know, a lot of us thought for some time there that Falwell was the one having the affair with the pool boy. It turns out it was Falwell's wife, and that Falwell, the headline, this is so sad, over at Raw Story, "My husband likes to watch and he's wearing a Speedo." It was the text message apparently to the pool boy from the wife. But the thing that I think is, makes this news rather than just being salacious, I'm not a big fan of just, ranting about people's sex lives. And I think, the Clinton mess kind of proved to all of us that people's sex lives should really be their own business. But in 2015, in May of 2015, Falwell tried to buy out the pool boy and basically get him out of his life. And it turns out that this was because Donald Trump had just announced that he was running for president, and Falwell thought he'd play a big role in that administration. Granda said, quote, "Jerry Falwell Jr. admired Trump's strongman public persona. There was a noticeable personality change after Trump was elected. Falwell was drunk on power and felt like he could get away with anything. It was his determination to get the money that led him to continue to seek payment." Oh, I'm sorry, this is about Granda. It was that's this report on this thing that was, in fact, Falwell even became close to Trump, even being offered the position of education secretary, although Betsy DeVos got the job. Strange stuff, sad stuff. It's just I'm deeply saddened by that. Regine in Ellenville, New York. Hey, Regine, what's up? What's on your mind today?
I'm calling today because I believe that what the Republican Party is doing right now, this is the last throes of white supremacy, patriarchy, the whole thing, the oligarchy. It's all falling down, and that's what's going on now. They're desperate to hold on to their power, and it's all there. That's why they're gaslighting everybody, because white supremacy is going down. What do you think, Tom?
I think you're right, Regine, and in that context, I think you could characterize what is happening, assuming there's a giant if here, and that is if they lose, as the beginning of the end, basically. The lie of Reaganism has been revealed. You've got even Republicans writing books like It Was All a Lie and the Grifters Club, things like that. So this could be the last. I don't think white supremacy is ever going to go away, but this could be the last gasp of white supremacy being the pivot point or the lever that politicians can use to acquire and hold political power. And that would be a good thing if this is the last gasp of it. And the protests against the shooting of Jacob Blake, for example, another example. What do you think, Regine?
I think so, and I also think that the people of America, they talk about the silent majority, and we're now the silent majority. Those of us that see what's going on, and these right wingers and these hate-filled, violent people that the president puts up as true patriots. I think everybody's seeing the falsehood of that, and I think the only thing that's going to save us is if are the people that are related to these people in power and these people that are violent and think that the only way to own the libs is to threaten violence. They don't realize they're being owned. And I think the people of America now have woken up. The only thing is that we now have to have the courage to stand up to these people when they see them. And I really, I told all my friends, when you have that racist uncle at Thanksgiving dinner, you need to call him out on it, because that's what I've done all my life. I mean, it didn't make me a lot of friends, but at least people know where you stand. And I think once this is no longer accepted in the family, that's the only way we get rid of it. That's the only way we get rid of this idea that the rich should have everything and the poor should have nothing, and that we continue to, penalize people for being poor. And we need to stop that. And once people know the reasons why people are poor, the reasons why people are poor.
Yeah, amen. I couldn't have said it better myself. I completely agree, and I think that this may well be a turning point, and if so, it's a good thing. Frankly, that Trump has come out and he was just like too dumb to keep talking in code like Nixon and Reagan and both Bushes did.
Well, they don't care anymore. Arrogance has made them, arrogance and hubris is going to be what brings them down. Their arrogance. Look at the Falwell kid. All that power, all that privilege, born in that family, all that stuff, and he still turns out to be just a regular human being. You know what I mean? He's just a regular guy who likes to do kinky stuff with his wife. So what? They're just people.
Exactly. Except that he's running a university. Except that he's running a university where that explicitly, says gay people are not welcome here, and or anybody on that spectrum. The
as doctors who are not, who've not been.
Well, yes and no. Probably 95% of the stuff that gets dealt with in just average clinics and people showing up for health care and whatnot is the kind of stuff that a nurse practitioner or a PA is appropriate to deal with, and they can refer people to docs.
But now what they're doing in California is just expanding the scope of practice where they can read their own imaging.
The solution to this, Hussein, is not to expand. First of all, I'm not opposed to expanding the scope of practice. But the solution is to stop the AMA's cap on the number of doctors who can graduate from medical schools. That's the problem we have here. They tried to drive up scarcity to keep wages high.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
There's a lot of people graduating with PA or nurse practitioner NP degrees who easily could have been doctors had the slots been available. And welcome back. James in Michigan City, Indiana. Hey, James, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Well, I'm calling basically to disagree with you about, you're reading from your book today, which you were doing last week, and you've been doing this for years, and other people do this too. And I think that, most people know a little bit about American politics know this isn't true, but let me get to the point. You seem to be implying, or even more so, that older voters in this country are a democratic, small capital D, demographic. And if you really break it down by age groups, the Republicans do very well with older voters. And I just want to kind of straighten the record about that. And, really, you put that in your book, which takes balls, as they say. And, what do you have what do you have to say about that?
The fact of the matter is, James, that older voters do vote Social Security and Medicare, and that's my point. When the Republicans are actively attacking Social Security and Medicare, older voters flee the Republicans. When Democrats are promoting Social Security and Medicare, they do well with older voters. And increasingly now that the Republican Party is explicitly opposed to Medicare and Medicaid. They've been for years trying to dance around this. Oh, we support it, and we're going to strengthen it, and all this kind of stuff. And increasingly, older voters are figuring out that that's a scam. You're absolutely right that if you look at the demographic of Fox News viewers, for example, the average age of somebody watching Fox is 70 or 71 years old. There are a lot of old right-wingers, but I don't think that voting bloc is anywhere near as monolithic as you're characterizing.
Well, they're still mostly Republican older voters. That's all I'm saying.
Depends on where you are in the country.
Changing.
But, I'm not disputing that. What I am saying, though, is that when the issue becomes things like Medicare and Medicaid, older voters will abandon the Republican Party to make sure that those programs are covered. James, thanks a lot for the call. Pauline in Los Angeles. Hey, Pauline, what's up? Thanks for listening to KPFK.
Hi there. Hi. I wanted to, if Democrats win back the presidency and keep the House and the Senate, I think we need to pass a new act that not only restores the post office, but restructures it and gives it more authority to manage and execute all federal elections by mail. Not to say that there won't be still state-run elections in person that will be managed by the states and local, but if putting into the federal power to have all mail voting managed and oversight by the federal government by the post office, and that would include
I agree
making departments of oversight for anti-fraud, cybersecurity, and ballot counting to avoid what you've been talking about, the local and state not ratifying the count.
I agree, Pauline. Forgive the interruption, but I did want to say something. We're going to hit a break in about 10 seconds. I think that the post office also should be providing us with high-speed broadband nationwide. And I think that the post office should also be offering low-cost postal banking services to people who don't have enough money to have a regular banking account. But I completely agree with you that increasingly voting is, or the mail is essential, the essential part of our voting infrastructure. In 5 of our states, it is. There's no longer in-person voting. and or at least in here in Oregon and in Washington State. In the other 3 states, they may still have a voting booth someplace, but by and large, it has become essential infrastructure. Spot on, Pauline. Thank you. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you 10 minutes before the hour. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
Well, what's on my mind today, Tom, is the attempted assassination of Mr. Blake. You're probably not surprised at that. And you know that I have been on both sides of the handcuffs. I've been the placee and the placor. And I can tell you that, and I've mentioned this to you over the years, that unfortunately the police craft in this country is inherently racist. From the referring to the cars as black and whites to the black silhouette targets with the black image and the white background. It's all programming. But, I wanted to ask you a question, and I'm not asking it in a confrontational or controversial way, though it may end up that way, but I do know that your audience is mainly a liberal white audience. And here's my question. Under what circumstance does, for lack of a better term, white America feel that black people in America, under what circumstances should we be able to defend ourselves? Because we certainly can't call the police. That's like calling internal affairs. That's just cops protecting cops. At what point? And I'm not being, like I said, I just want to, because it's, at what point? Because I cannot imagine, Tom, I cannot imagine, and I'm sure you've seen the video of what happened to Mr. Blake, and of course you've seen what happened to Mr. Floyd and Tamir Rice and over again. I cannot imagine these things happening in reverse. Black officers doing this to white people. I cannot imagine white people in America, European Americans, sitting idly by. And please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you make an excellent point, and the larger point beyond the obvious racism in our society and the obvious racism that comes into policing is what's it going to take for us to have police forces that are not running this racist slave patrol routine. And I honestly don't know the answer to that question, Kenyatta. Obviously a lot of racial diversity in our police departments, a lot of across the board in police departments across the United States. Putting people of color, particularly black people, in charge of them would be a good idea. Although we've seen police departments that are run by black people that have, substantial numbers of black people on the forces that still engage in violence against black people. And occasionally white people, presumably, but in particular against black people. And I think that that's more of a, that's not so much racially motivated as it is probably class or just the idea that, hey, we've got the blue uniforms, we've got the guns, we're the tough guys here. Don't mess with us. I mean, there's a mentality associated with policing in the United States that you, by and large, don't see in a lot of other countries. And Louise and I have been watching this crime series from BBC. It's called Silent Witness. And every week they're confronting a serial killer or something like that. And nobody ever has guns out, and the cops aren't showing up like a SWAT team. We have this idea of policing in the United States that is purely violence-based, and it's bizarre and dysfunctional and destructive. And when you add, the toxic racism that is part of our society to it, you've got what we have right now. But we've got to rebuild our policing from the bottom up with a different understanding of what being a cop means. Have I even begun to answer your what I think was probably a rhetorical question?
No, you as usual. You are the man. I mean, and you're so honest, and I appreciate that. I do want to say this to you. I know that I sent you some information about the SWAT mafia on LAPD. You've got one of the LAPD SWAT officers that has gone and by the way, has had to go undercover with all types of body coverage because he told about this culture of violence. It's the culture of the craft. And I want to tell you something, Tom, that a lot of black people won't say, but I will. A black police officer is a black man's worst nightmare. Don't get it twisted. I've got three things I want to say about police reform. I talked to you about this before. I was not upset, but I was disappointed that the Democrats during their convention didn't really zero in on this directly, and now we see it rear its ugly head again. There's three things that weren't in the Police Reform Act, Tom, that we can do to do exactly what you said, change the culture. One is body cams, unless that officer is code 7, that means at lunch or using the bathroom, if that officer is on active duty, if he's not out of service, that body cam ought to be on and uploaded to a live server for everyone to see. They're public servants. Why are they hiding? Number one. Number two, something that police unions have vehemently opposed, and that is drug testing for its members. Are you kidding? Every time one of these young black men or women, we found drugs in their system, no one ever tests the cops. And finally, the third rail would be to stop, again, with the mentality, the reform part of it, stop calling it a police force, but you are a peace officer. See, as a man thinks, so he is. Thank you for the time, Tom.
Change the language around it. Yeah, Kenya, I think those are all brilliant ideas, and they would address the culture of policing. I think that I would add to it that, again, have you seen Michael Moore's movie, Where to Invade Next?
Absolutely. Excellent film. Yeah,
so you know the part about the Norwegian jails. Just the whole idea of why we police, the whole idea of why we have jails. Is it for punishment or is it for rehabilitation? Is our goal to bring people back into society, help them heal and become functional members of society? Or is our goal to segregate them from society for the rest of their lives? We have fallen in that latter response. Our goal is to keep people separate from the rest of the country, essentially forever, or punish them so badly that they're broken. And I don't think any other developed country in the world does that. I think the third world countries do that. I think that's how Turkey polices and Egypt polices, but that's certainly not how Germany policed when I lived there. So, I see, the things you proposed, I think, are brilliant. And I think that we need to even go beyond that. Kenyatta, thank you. Thank you for bringing your expertise and your experience as a former police officer as well into this conversation. I appreciate it. We'll be back hitting the top of the hour here. We've got a lot of fascinating guests coming up. Stick around. Up next, Kevin Patel.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is the director and producer of a brand new movie about Donald Trump. It's titled Unfit, The Psychology of Donald Trump. The website is unfitfilm.com. Dan Partland is the director and producer, and he's on the line with us. The Unfit movie, by the way, is the Twitter handle. Dan, welcome to the program. Tell us about the movie.
Thank you for having me on, Tom. The Twitter handle that we use is actually Duty to Warn, which with the number 2, and we can talk about why later. Okay. The movie was really born out of something that I think everybody saw right in the early days of the Trump campaign in 2016, in the early days of the presidency, which is there was such a divided way in terms of how the public saw it. Some people saw immediately a strong, charismatic leader, confidence, and some people saw a guy who was weak and insecure and a bundle of nerves all the time and anxieties. And I just thought that was really interesting and tried to get some insight into what the mental health community sees in his behavior.
And what did you learn?
Well, what I learned is that there was this feeling I had throughout the coverage of the Trump presidency that there was something missing in the coverage, that there was something that wasn't being said. It was unsatisfying. Every week there was a new scandal and very little insight connecting, because there was an obvious sameness to these scandals. But nobody seemed to be talking about it. And what I found out is that there's a reason why nobody's talking about it, is that it's a psychological phenomenon. It's Trump's psychology that unifies these theories, and that the mental health community was, in fact, gagged, muzzled from talking about it in the run-up to the 2016 campaign.
Does Trump's psychology, in the opinion of the mental health professionals that you interviewed and what you put together in this film, we're talking about Dan Partland. He's got a new movie out. It's out next week, September 1st. It's titled Unfit, The Psychology of Donald Trump, the website unfitfilm.com. How is Donald Trump's psychology consequentially different from that of Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Richard Nixon, the Republicans who preceded him, who have basically pursued the exact policies, sell off public lands, kneecap the EPA, cut back on enforcement by the IRS, promote militarism and violent policing, stigmatize and freak out about people of color, et cetera. I mean, I can't think of any Trump policies specifically that aren't broadly in line with historic republic, outside of his rhetoric against so-called free trade. But his actions really have just, he hasn't done anything consequential. How is he different than the other Republicans?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the mental health professionals, I'll give a broader context for the film, but the mental health professionals in the film speak openly about potential diagnoses that you could see in Trump, and they explain how they arrive at that behavior, at those diagnoses, which is basically from observing behavior. So the reason they were gagged in the run-up to the 2016 election that I referred to is that the APA, American Psychiatric Association, has a longstanding ethical rule guideline called the Goldwater Rule, which came out of an incident that happened in the 1964 campaign where mental health professionals were commenting quite recklessly about the mental stability of Barry Goldwater. Turns out Goldwater was stable, and that the comments were really irresponsible. They were being made without appropriate knowledge of Goldwater. They violated the ethics of the day. They speculated a lot about his inner life that you really couldn't know without having seen him in a clinical setting. The diagnostic criteria that mental health professionals use in the film are really based on observable behavior. And that's really how we make behavioral diagnoses. And the diagnosis that is explored in the film is called malignant narcissism. It's a very, very serious diagnosis that it's more of a syndrome that comprises 4 separate diagnoses. And when they work together, there's really quite a devastating effect. It's a diagnosis that really came out of the post-World War II era, and legendary psychiatrist Erich Fromm and his exploration of his effort to try to understand Hitler. So the phenomenon of the syndrome of malignant narcissism is really comprised of 4 main elements, which is narcissism, paranoia, antisocial personality disorder, and sadism. And the different psychologists and psychiatrists in the film walk you through how those 4 diagnoses really work together to become quite a powerful constellation of traits that really prohibit someone with this diagnosis really incapable of thinking about people outside of what it is they can do for them. I think there's a brutality to Trump that is on display every day. It comes from the lack of empathy, which is part of an antisocial personality disorder, the paranoia, the narcissism, and honestly, obviously, he has there's a cruelty that I think we've seen on display that qualifies as sadism.
Yeah, I totally get it. We have about 2.5 minutes until we hit a hard break here. We're talking with Dan Partland, the director and producer of this new film about the psychology of Donald Trump. It's titled Unfit. Unfitfilm.com is the website. You can find all the information. And Duty to Warn, number 2, is the Twitter handle. And Dan, why Duty to Warn?
Well, so while the Goldwater Rule on the one hand prohibits mental health professionals from talking about, from politicizing mental health diagnoses, the counterbalancing ethical guideline also by the APA is called the Tarasoff Rule. And that enshrines the duty to warn, which is it states that if a mental health professional has knowledge of imminent danger that they see, it's their duty, and this has been enshrined in law as well, not just the trade association, professional association. It is their responsibility under law to speak up. So you have these 2 countervailing ethical guidelines, and the psychologists and psychiatrists in the film believe that the duty to warn is much more important than the Goldwater guideline, which is misapplied here.
Right, because the Goldwater guideline is basically let's not sully the reputation of our industry, essentially, or of our practice, whereas duty to warn is let's save lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
the Goldwater Rule is somewhat antiquated. It really, the intention was good to keep from politicizing mental health. I think that's really, really important. But it doesn't really apply in this instance.
So, Dan, how can people see the movie? We're talking with the director and producer of Unfit, the new movie about the psychology of Donald Trump, unfitfilm.com.
Well, the movie starts with the psychology of Donald Trump, and then it really expands into a much larger discussion of the psychology of the electorate.
No, my question was, where can people see it? How can people find it?
People can see it. It will be streaming and on-demand services. Every cable company and every streamer in the country should have it on demand September 1st.
Wow, that's cool. Okay, the movie is Unfit, the psychology of Donald Trump. Dan Partland is the producer and director. Dan, I wish you the very best with it.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks. Good talking with you. This is, wake up America, right? You've got a mentally ill person in the White House. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Len in Woodmere, New York. Hey, Len, what's on your mind today?
Hi. The way to talk about Donald Trump, when everybody asks why is his numbers still high about the economy, the answer is, number one, he keeps talking enough to make some people believe it. But the other way,
right, it's the big lie.
This would be the other way that would be beautiful in a debate. Biden, could respond. You can talk about this in a way that even Donald Trump will understand it. Imagine Barack Obama stepping up to the tee in 2009 on the economy, taking a swing, and the ball goes sailing and continues sailing and sailing for 8 years. And then in 2016, he has to step down, and Donald Trump now steps up to the tee and just points to the ball and says, "Look what I did." Basically, he didn't do anything. All he did was come along afterwards and start claiming credit from day one. And I think
you can make a strong case that Obama initiated the longest economic expansion in the history of the United States. I would suggest that wasn't necessarily due to Obama's brilliance. It was due to the fact that it was one of the deepest downturns. And so, recovering from that and just getting back to normal is what took the first 4 years. And then the next, 5-6 years, that extended into Trump's presidency were actually the effects of the stimulus. But your point is really well taken, Len. And every time Trump brags about the economy, we need to add that he inherited from Barack Obama. And just like everything else he's inherited in his whole entire life, he pissed it away. He ruined it.
And one other little point, when you get your early mail-in ballot, just or something you can deliver, send it from a Republican area if you can drive 10, 15 minutes, and it'll even make it there more likely.
There you go. I'm not sure about that, Len, but, vote early. That's the bottom line. Len, thanks for the call. Donna in Bonnie Lake, Washington. Hey, Donna. Thanks for listening on the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Yeah, good morning. So I retired from driving a postal truck out of the Seattle area in 2015. And, we delivered the mail to the postal facilities and then brought the mail back to the processing plant. And one thing I haven't heard is, traffic delays the mail as well. And I'll tell you, in Seattle, that can be considerable at times. And they would also, in the morning dispatches, which are at 4:30 and 6:30 in the morning, they regularly would hold us up about 10 or 15 minutes to get the last of the equipment on the trucks. And to me, that always seemed, reasonable, like the right thing to do.
Yeah, and that's what DeJoy put an end to. He said you can't wait for the rest of the mail. You've got to leave the rest of the mail on the floor and pull the truck out. And as a result, we've got reports all over the country of trucks pulling out empty, going on 500-mile round trips, empty, because DeJoy said you've got to leave at 5 a.m. whether the truck is loaded or not.
Yeah, I don't trust
Donna?
him, and I hope the Democrats are hard on him and the conflict of interest as well. It's just wrong.
Oh, I'm with you. I am with you. Holding stock options in Amazon and having, stock in his own company, it's insane. Donna, thank you for the call, and thanks for your insight as a former postal worker. We'll be right back. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A little more of the, what's in the news right now. This is, I think, tells us a lot, frankly. The number of people who were criminally indicted in the 4 or 8 years of an administration. In the 8 years of the Barack Obama administration, the number of administration officials who were criminally indicted was 0. 8 years, no criminal indictments. In the 6.5, 7 years, whatever it was, Richard Nixon was in office, he had 76 criminal indictments, most all of them having to do with Watergate. But that was the peak. Out of all of history, was 76 criminal indictments in the Nixon administration for people who were mostly engaged in covering up the whole Watergate break-in, where Nixon was trying to find out, he was trying to break into the DNC, and well, it's a whole long story, and we can get Lamar on to talk about it sometime. In fact, he wrote a book, The Hidden History of Watergate. That's brilliant. But anyhow, that was 76 criminal indictments. Ronald Reagan had 26 criminal indictments. They were mostly centered around Iran-Contra, the scheme that Bill Casey, Reagan's campaign manager, later CIA chief, until he told his lawyer, Milton Gould, that he was going to testify before a Senate committee that was investigating Iran-Contra. And the next morning, the morning of the day that Bill Casey was supposed to testify before Congress, and he had told Milton Gould, his lawyer, he was going to blow the whistle on Reagan and Bush. That morning, he got into the CIA's director's office. He was the director of the CIA, gets in there, sits down behind the desk, and within the first hour of the day, that afternoon he's supposed to testify, he has a massive seizure. They scrape him off the floor. Region, the left parietal lobe of the brain, which is the part that controls speech. They essentially cut out his tongue, and he died about 6 weeks later from complications from that surgery. But that was, there were 26 criminal indictments around that, and who knows, Bill Casey might have been one of them if he had lived long enough. And then the George W. Bush administration had 16 criminal indictments. So here we've got 4 Republican administrations. George W. Bush with 16 criminal indictments, Reagan with 26, Richard Nixon with 76, Donald Trump, 215. Once again, total number of criminal indictments in the Barack Obama administration, 0. In the Jimmy Carter administration, 1. In the Bill Clinton administration, 2. In the Jerry Ford administration, 1. You can say, okay, one off, yeah, that's kind of random, but Donald, this guy's a one-man crime spree.
215 criminal indictments in the Donald Trump administration, and his kids and his shills have the temerity to stand in front of America last night, they're going to do it again tonight, and say, we are the law and order people. We're the ones who support the police. We're the ones who care about the fate and future of the rule of law. I mean, it's just astonishing. It's like there is almost no... Who has run the Trump campaign without ending up in prison? I mean, he had a campaign manager in Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen goes to jail. He had a campaign manager in Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort goes to jail. He had a campaign, number 2 in Rick Gates, who was supposed to become the campaign manager. He goes to prison or gets criminally indicted. I mean, most of these guys are out now because of COVID and they're white-collar criminals and whatnot. But this is nuts. This is extremely crazy. So how long is it going to last? How long are they going to be able to pull off this con that, oh yeah, we're the law and order? It's just like Nixon. Nixon, who had, the 76 criminal indictments, and Trump now with 215. Who is, in both cases, they're out there saying, I'm with the cops. Well, what cops are they with? Are they with the police who actually care about law and order? Or are they with the police who like to beat up black people? Is that really the limit of what they're doing? It seems to me that that's what's going on. Donald Trump telling police officers, he was at that Police Chiefs Association, he said, don't, when you put them in the car, you put your hand on their head so they don't bang their head. He says, don't do that, rough them up a little bit. Well, that's not calling for law or order. That's breaking the law by police in a way that is disorderly. This is what we saw with Jacob Blake. You got a cop shooting a guy 7 times in the back in front of his 3 children in the backseat of his car. I mean, how is that law and order? How is it law and order when a couple of lawyers stand in front of their house and wave guns at peaceful protesters? How is that law and order? Well, the simple answer is it's not. It wasn't with Nixon. Frankly, it wasn't with George W. Bush, although it wasn't so much the police departments in the United States that they were empowering to break the law. It was the CIA in Afghanistan and Iraq and Gitmo. And now you've got Trump, same thing. These guys are criminals. They support criminals.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And they want to empower the worst and most criminal element that has, infiltrated and infected many of our police forces.
4-hour Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today. We're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government, grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
On this week's Science Revolution, Ethan Manuel with Sierra Club's Land Protection Program is here on Trump greenlighting drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Will the oil companies show up? Adrian Shelley with Public Citizen is dropping by on the methane rule rollback and the Trump administration's continued assault on our climate. Lori Lodes with Climate Power 2020 is excited about Biden and Harris painting a bold climate action plan with clean energy jobs. Plus, in geeky science, there's a new study out. Do plant-based meats improve your heart? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a new book out, The Grifters Club, Trump, Mar-a-Lago, and the Selling of the Presidency by Miami Herald journalist Sarah Blaskey. It's just an extraordinary book. Sarah's Twitter handle is, well, actually, I don't have it here. Sarah, welcome to here it is, BLASKEY_S. Sarah, welcome to the program. Tell us about The Grifters Club. What inspired the creation of this book?
Well, thanks so much for having me. So what inspired this book was finding ourselves as local journalists living in the backyard of the White House. No South Florida journalist thinks that's going to happen to them. We all think, the White House is in D.C. I think that's a pretty obvious assumption. But when President Trump became the president years ago, it meant that the Miami Herald office where I work sort of found itself in the middle of national politics. And so we started reporting on that. And eventually that became this book, The Grifters Club.
So why the word grifter?
So grifter in its traditional sense is kind of like a used car salesman, right? And I think we get a lot of that happening around the club. But also beyond that, in its colloquial sense, the term grifter is someone who just sort of oversells what they actually have to offer. And when we started digging into Mar-a-Lago, what became clear quickly is those big ticket corruption items that everyone was looking for. This someone whispering into the ear of the president, well, it can happen and it does happen at the club. That isn't the norm of what happens. Actually, the norm of what happens is people sort of overselling the kind of access that they have to the president and what goes on there. And I think that is the bigger idea that we get at in this book is there is influence, there is the potential for corruption, but beyond that, there are all of these mini businesses and brands that are being built around this club, which, as we know, President Trump calls the Winter White House from time to time.
So to restate, we're talking with Sarah Blaskey, the journalist of the Miami Herald and co-author of this new book, The Grifters Club, Trump, Mar-a-Lago, and the Selling of the Presidency. What you're suggesting is that among members of Mar-a-Lago, the people who paid a couple $100,000 in order to be able to hang out with Trump, there is a mini industry of selling influence, of people saying, give me money and I will deliver your message to Donald Trump, or I will see to it that what you want happens. Do I have that right? And if so, how does that tie into the three guys from Mar-a-Lago who are supposedly running the whole Veterans Administration?
So those three guys that you're talking about, Ike Perlmutter in particular, the chairman of Marvel Comics, that's a little bit of a unique situation. I don't want to say unique, actually, but that is less common than the other situations I want to talk to you about. And it is clear that Mr. Perlmutter did have influence, was a very trusted advisor of the president, is a very trusted advisor. And that is through his club membership. This is a member who has been a member for years, since he's one of the original members, and that's really how you gain the trust of this president, is that you've known him a long time, you're part of that inner circle. And so you do see these older members, the ones that have been members longer, having more actual influence in Washington, D.C. and in this presidency. But more common, the newer members who have paid these big ticket, for these big ticket entry fees, don't know the president as well. And so I wouldn't say that they're advertising, hey, I will get you in with the president. But some members are building their own personal brands off of the presidential brand. There are some members who have built their own media brands around being perceived as close to the president or an insider. There are other people who have marketed galas and that kind of thing at the club as ways for people to brush shoulders with the president, to potentially take pictures with him, which can be used, especially in other countries, especially in China, for example, can be used as a leverage point in business negotiations. So it's actually something that people will pay tens of thousands of dollars for, just the chance to take a picture with the president.
So Trump's presidency is not only being monetized by Trump, but it's being monetized by a whole bunch of people who are members of the Grifters Club of Mar-a-Lago. Is Mar-a-Lago specifically the Grifters Club, or is the Grifters Club, in your conception of it, that group of people who have decided that they're going to play the role of connections?
Well, Tom, I think I'm going to let the reader determine that after reading the book. So I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts if they want to email me about that. But I do think it's a concept that we should be very clear about, that there are all kinds of people wheeling and dealing, and some legally, some perhaps not, all around the president, and that this is a unique situation in large part because no other president has ever owned a club, and especially no other president has lived in, as in their official domicile has been this club with 500 members and countless thousands of guests.
Right. So it occurs to me, Sarah, that a legitimate, honest president, Barack Obama, for example, would not be afraid of taking into his confidence or bringing into his inner circle people who he had no idea who they were. Let me rephrase that. Who he had never met. He didn't know personally, but he did know that they were competent. In other words, Obama would bring in somebody to run HHS who he knew how to run HHS, whether he knew them or not. But Trump seems to be only bringing people into his circle, or largely bringing people into his circle, who, and I think your book highlights this, who he has had long relationships with, who he can trust. Isn't that a cardinal characteristic of organized crime? Isn't that what mob bosses do?
Well, it's true that this president is one that cares a lot about loyalty, and that loyalty to him and the idea that he is celebrated as an ultimate leader of this group, which is generally his family first and then his closest friends, who some might call sort of extended parts of the Trump family. It is true that those are the people that the president turns to, and often those are the people, and it's in the book, those are the people who actually physically sit in the tables around the table he sits at Mar-a-Lago. So if you were to walk into the dinner or the dining room at this club, and the closer you get to the president, the people that you see closest to him sitting around are going to be those family members, or might as well be family members, the trusted old friends. And what's interesting, I think, is that some of these old friends, the people that he trusts the most, aren't all Republicans. Some of them are longtime Democratic backers. And so this is a president who, above all else, above ideology, above policy, will turn to old friends and family first for any sort of advice, for bouncing ideas off of. And you see that most at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump was a Democrat and registered as a Democrat. His kids were all registered as Democrats. He's sent two checks to Kamala Harris. He's sent 7 checks to Joe Biden. I mean, before 2015, when he decided he was going to run this giant grift on America and pretend that he was a presidential candidate in order to get a raise out of NBC, he was a Democrat, too. It's bizarre. Sarah, we just have 40 seconds left before we hit a hard break here. What's the number one takeaway you want people to get when they read your book, The Grifters Club?
I think people really need to get a sense of this president and that it's not about policy. This president is the ultimate maitre d'. He's the ultimate club owner. And you can explain any of the apparent contradictions of this president through that lens. So doesn't wear a mask, but is a huge germaphobe. Well, his party guests, in this case, the voter base of the Republican Party, don't want to wear masks. So the germaphobe in chief isn't going to wear a mask either. He always plays to his crowd. He's incredibly good at this. And this is something I think we should watch going into the election.
Remarkable. Sarah Blaskey, the new book is The Grifters Club, Trump, Mar-a-Lago, and the Selling of the Presidency. It's absolutely brilliant. Sarah, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, and I wish you the very best with the book. Sarah Blaskey. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Up next, your calls. We'll be right back. And welcome back. And Len in Silva, North Carolina. Hey, Len, what's on your mind today?
Hey there. I was wondering if anybody else had thought that that speech last night by Trump looked like a carnival barker.
By Don Jr.?
Yeah.
He struck me as a guy who was... first of all, I continue to think that he was squinting and his eyes were having trouble because he was having a hard time reading the prompter because he's wearing contacts. He's at that age where, where presbyopia starts to kick in. But it seemed to me like he was frightened. I think that he is looking at the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. The cons.
I think that's good.
Yeah, I do too, but I think he understands if he can't get people to vote for his daddy, he's going to go to jail, and he's not enthusiastic about that, and obviously for good reason.
Also, can't understand how they can spew out these numbers that we've done this so well that we've only killed off 177,000 people. It's like you said yesterday when you were talking about the guy with the airplanes riding on an airplane that was going to crash.
Yeah. It's no big deal. It's no problem. I remember back in I think it was the 80s, maybe the early 90s, when that DC-10 or the L-1011 went down in Florida, and then a DC-10 went down in Chicago, where the wing, the engine fell off the wing, and nobody would fly 3-engine airplanes. They ended up retiring both those airplanes, the DC-10 and the L-1011. And although FedEx is still flying them as cargo planes, but nobody would get on one. And that was 2 crashes in 1 year, as I recall, or in relatively close proximity to each other.
The thing is, I really believe that as long as all of us go out and vote like we're supposed to, we're going to get this bozo out of office.
Yeah, assuming our votes get counted. I mean, this is the thing that keeps me up at night is Joseph Stalin saying to his secretary, "I don't care who votes. What I care about is who counts the votes. That's what matters." And and that's what Trump, I believe, is counting on. Len, thanks a lot for the call. I got to move along here. Virginia in Seattle. Hey, Virginia, what's up?
Hi, I agree with you on the counting votes thing. He's really counting on that. But I watched the RNC last night. What became really clear to me is that they're obviously going to use huge fear things to get these people that he's not sure about to vote for him. And I think that if the Democratic people keep using, oh, we're so nice and we're going to make things really sweet, it's not going to work. I think what we have to do, and even on television and us at home and everybody, is to talk about how awful it is now that we're having all these.
But the loss of democracy, Virginia, to most people is an abstraction compared with the Republicans' message that black people are coming to burn your home.
That's true. That's true. We have to deal with that too. But
yeah, I mean, I think this is the biggest challenge. The Democrats are talking about something that is, I mean, there's real world consequences and we can identify them and all that kind of thing. But by and large, it's more abstract. And the Republicans and Reagan and Nixon did this very, very well, are basically explicitly saying, look out, white people, black people are coming for you. And I don't know any kind of Democratic message that's that scary. Virginia, thank you for the call. Latest hidden history books on monopoly and oligarchy, wherever fine books are found. So what if... Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, this is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation, end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Earlier this morning you were talking about how patients with COVID that got treated within 3 days with plasma showed some benefit from it. How many people do you know of that get a response or a test response within 3 days? I mean,
exactly.
From what I'm hearing, it's 7 to 21 days, sometimes 30 days before they ever get a response back. So they're supposed to self-quarantine until they find out. Well, it's pointless.
Right.
Only the rich get those
and
tests.
hope they don't die.
Yeah, and only the rich get those tests. So, you got your private jet and you got your private testing kits, and you'll know right away, and you'll go to the hospital.
Well, there's this whole phenomena right now, Sandra. There was a story about this that I shared with people last week. I think it was in the Daily Mail about wealthy people around the United States. It's particularly hot right now, apparently, with the Silicon Valley crowd. The billionaires, the multimillionaires, that they've got these instant tests. They're readily available if you're willing to pay for them. Some of them are even charging their guests $500 a pop for the test. And if you want to come to their party, you've got to be instant tested before you walk in the door.
Yeah.
That's, and hospitals can't get these tests. Doctors' offices can't get these tests, or they could, but they don't have $500 a pop to pay for them, or, maybe they're not even available. But Trump and his rich buddies and everybody at the White House has these tests. It's, at the very least, there's something very, very wrong here. Sandra, I've got to move along, but thank you. Your point was very well made. Harry in Bryson City, North Carolina. Hey, Harry, what's up?
Tom, I promised to be brief, but please let me make my point. I'm 75 years old, and I voted in my first election was 1964. My mother told me when I went to vote that there was two reasons for me to go vote Republican. One, I was extremely wealthy, and the other, I was extremely stupid. Well, I have voted for the Democratic Party in every election since then, except for 1 year, my wife and I voted for Ralph Nader. We've been hopeful all this time that the progressives would come forward, the liberal voters would come forward, and we would get a platform on the Democratic Party. That's not happened, maybe with one exception, Lyndon Johnson. Well, this year, for this election, My wife voted for Bernie Sanders, and I voted for Elizabeth Warren. Now, the Democrats saw fit to put Biden in office, and he had the perfect opportunity to put somebody in as vice president who was a liberal and a progressive, either Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. He didn't do that. Well, we've decided to sit out this election. We're fed up with the Democratic Party.
That's a mistake, Harry. That is a mistake. If you don't vote, you are voting for Trump.
We've decided throughout the years that there's not been much difference in either party.
Yeah, Harry, that's complete BS. And I would bet $50 that Harry is a Republican or is working for the Republican Party. I just want to say to everybody who's listening, people like this are going to slip through. And Joyce, please flag Harry's phone number. Let me just check here. Yeah, this is, this sincerity BS. His number ends in 6222. This is the kind of story you are going to be hearing. You're going to hear a lot of people talking like Harry. Like, I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life, but this guy, he's just not liberal enough. They're trying to get you not to vote. It is a scam. Harry is a hustler. This is how the Republicans play, because they know that they can't win when they play fair. When the Republican Party plays fair, when they tell the truth about what they're all up to. I mean, Donald Trump has a proposal on the ground right now. He issued an executive order that will cause Social Security to go broke in 3 years. Broke in 3 years. And 75-year-olds are calling me up saying, Joe Biden's just not pure enough for me. Give me a break. Harry, take your con job and shove it. Americans are not this stupid. I get it that Republicans have been playing this game since Nixon and Reagan, and they've conned a lot of Americans. They've conned a lot of decent, hardworking, honest Americans. But we don't want to hear this crap anymore. We don't want to hear these lies. We don't want to hear these attempts. I'm lacking words here. I'm just boggled that a political party would stoop so low, that the Republican Party would stoop so low to be hustling people. Okay. On the other hand, I shouldn't be astonished at all. The Republican Party has been running a con on Americans in a big way. I mean, in a public way, right in front of everybody, ever since 1980. Ever since Ronald Reagan came along and said, if you just cut taxes on rich people and big corporations and deregulate them and stop having the anti-monopoly laws and things, average working people are going to get better. And guess what happened in 1980? The growth of the middle class stopped. And it hasn't grown in 40 years. We're at the tail end of a 40-year-long experiment that has shown Reaganomics and the Republican Party are running an absolute lie. And the only way they can continue in power is by lying to you, is by conning you with sometimes these very sincere, folksy little messages like Harry just laid out for us. Very elegant, Harry. Ain't gonna work. We figured you out. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Ruth Marcus, Supreme Ambition, Brett Kavanaugh and the Conservative Takeover. This is from the prologue. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy had a request. Would President Trump have a few minutes to speak privately? It was April 10th, 2017, a sparkling spring morning in Washington, and Kennedy was at the White House to preside over the ceremonial swearing in of the newest Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch. First time in history that a sitting justice had sworn in one of his former law clerks to join him on the bench. Just 80 days into Trump's chaotic presidency, the confirmation of Gorsuch represented a rare and welcome victory for the beleaguered new administration, reeling from court defeats of its travel ban and, despite controlling both houses of Congress, unable to repeal President Obama's signature health care law. Perhaps most important, as the prominent conservative lawyers, activists, and judges assembled in the Rose Garden that day understood, Gorsuch's addition was just one step, necessary but not sufficient, in the 3 decades-long conservative bid to cement control over the high court. This effort had been as frustrating as it was lengthy. Seeming opportunities for dominance repeatedly slipped away, with Republican nominees, including Kennedy himself, turning out to be less reliably conservative than advertised. But Republicans have learned from these costly errors, assembling a farm team of potential nominees whose judicial records could be carefully scrutinized to detect any risk of ideological deviation. Gorsuch was among those who came bearing the seal of approval of the Federalist Society, the conservative legal group that had made itself the central actor in this court-shaping exercise and was playing an even more outsized role in the new administration. Trump took pains to single out one man who was not in the Rose Garden that day, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for all he did to make this achievement possible, quoting Trump. Indeed, everyone present knew that McConnell had been the indispensable man leading to that moment. Had it not been for McConnell, President Obama would have filled the vacancy created by Justice Anthony Scalia's sudden death in February 2016, and Justice Merrick Garland would be sitting on the high court, anchoring a newly fortified liberal majority. McConnell, with his audacious announcement that the opening would not be filled, no matter that Obama had 11 months remaining in his term, had avoided that fateful outcome. His intervention meant that Gorsuch now occupied Scalia's seat, a conservative for conservative swap. The next vacancy was almost certain to be the far more critical one, shifting the court's balance instead of affirming it. On that score, all eyes were on the 80-year-old Kennedy, then serving his 30th year on the high court, and by dint of age, years of service, and political allegiance, the most likely to depart. The swing justice on an already conservative court, Kennedy was pleased about Gorsuch, but he had another former law clerk in mind as he was ushered into Trump's private dining room for an unusual session with the president and White House counsel Don McGahn. Justices are routinely invited to the White House for social events, state dinners, and holiday parties, but at least until Trump took office, such one-on-one meetings were rare in the modern era. With its finicky notions about preserving the appearance of judicial independence, unlike the relaxed days when justices did double duty as private counselors to presidents such as Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. In the chronically leaky Trump White House, aides took pains to keep the Trump-Kennedy meetings secret. There were no public reports about the session, and only a few senior officials ever learned what Kennedy said to Trump that day. The justice's message to the president was as consequential as it was straightforward, and it was a remarkable insertion by a sitting justice into the distinctly presidential act of judge picking. As a candidate, Trump had upended tradition by issuing a list of judges. It ultimately grew to 21, including Gorsuch, from which he pledged to pick his Supreme Court nominees. Now Kennedy had a recommendation for Trump's list. "You named one of my former clerks," Kennedy told Trump. "You should think about another one, Brett Kavanaugh." When Anthony Kennedy spoke, the Trump White House listened, with good reason. During the campaign, when Trump, against all expectations, emerged as the Republican nominee and ultimate victor over Hillary Clinton, the issue of judicial selection had been a utilitarian means to an electoral end. The socially conservative and evangelical voters Trump needed to win were deeply, understandably suspicious of the thrice-married, once Democratic New Yorker. They were particularly dubious about how Trump would approach the critical task of shaping the federal judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. The list of high court candidates that Trump produced with the help of the Federalist Society, upending convention with typical Trumpian bravado, was explicitly aimed at calming their concerns, and it succeeded beyond the wildest expectations of its creators. On Election Day, more than a quarter of Trump voters identified the Supreme Court as the critical factor in determining their vote. White, evangelical, born-again Christians broke 81% for Trump to 16% for Hillary Clinton, meaning that Trump outperformed previous Republican nominees Mitt Romney, John McCain, and George W. Bush among such voters. In office, Trump not only keenly understood the politics of judicial selection and its importance for his reelection, he also gained a new appreciation for what the Supreme Court meant to a president's legacy. Thanks to McConnell's ruthlessness, Trump had inherited what no president had before, the gift of an existing vacancy. Supreme Ambition by Ruth Marcus.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Kevin Patel. He is the founder and executive director of OneUpAction.org, and they're chronicling what's going on with these wildfires and et cetera in California. Kevin, welcome to the program. Tell us what's the situation with the wildfires in California, and how is that affecting air quality, and why should we care?
Thank you so much for having me. The global wildfires, if you historically look at it, these are worse than ever in California. They're spread throughout the state of California, and they're not only causing people to evacuate during a global pandemic, but they're also, causing people who have respiratory issues or underlying health issues to even severely be affected by these conditions, because the air pollution and smog pollution just severely go up in these areas.
So have we seen epidemiological consequences of forest fires? This has been going on enough years. You would think that the data would be out there that, if you're X miles downwind of X fire, then your risk of developing asthma or coming up with some sort of respiratory disorder or having an increased risk of heart attack goes up by a certain percentage. Is that data available?
I'm sure that data is available. As a youth activist, I always try to search for that data, and I'm sure that, that data is available. What I look at is how air and smog pollution really affect these communities that are living close and proximate, living close to the fires, but also, that have other, that live near fossil fuel infrastructure. So it's a combination of both things, right? We're looking into the fossil fuel infrastructure, but we're also looking at the fires.
So living downwind of a cracking or a refinery operation or even a power plant is as dangerous or as bad as living downwind from a wildfire, or vice versa, right? Is that what you're saying?
Vice versa. I think it's what I'm trying to say is that, a lot of our community, 1.8 million Californians live near oil and gas wells, and the fossil fuel infrastructure, which is again releasing toxic chemicals, and they're being exposed to these toxic chemicals and breathing in all of this, but also while they're breathing all of these toxic chemicals, you're seeing that they're also living near these fires, which is also causing huge amounts of air and smog pollution, which causes underlying health issues, as data shows. So it definitely is something that I try to look into. I'm, a young activist. I'm 19 years of age, and I myself live in South Central Los Angeles, not near any wildfires, thank God, but within the state of California, and talking to peers that do live those two fires, they look at that statistic and saying, like, we're not only being attacked by the fossil fuel infrastructure, but we're also being attacked by rampant wildfires that are happening throughout the state of California. And a lot of people say, the governor, Gavin Newsom, said that recently in the DNC, he said, if you don't believe in climate change, come to California and just look at how rampant the fires are. And he said that because, never in history has there been so many wildfires simultaneously happening throughout the state of California and at a rampant rate where we are not even able to contain them just because of the heat waves and all of this, drastic weather patterns that are happening, especially with the 11,000, lightning strikes that were happening in communities, which was, to me is mind-boggling.
Yeah. It's extraordinarily ironic that the fossil fuel infrastructure that we've had for the last 150 years has produced the global warming that is producing the wildfires that are poisoning our air, just like the fossil fuel infrastructure was. Kevin Patel, the website is oneupaction.org, and he is the founder and executive director of One Up Action. Kevin, thanks for dropping by today. Great talking with you.
Great talking to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and keep up the great work. We need young people out there, raising the alarm, as it were. Back to your calls. Dennis in Long Island, New York. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hello, Tom. I was wondering if you could update us on the status of the investigation into that dog that President said received the mail-in ballot. Who registered that dog and what government official accepted that registration?
Right. And did the dog vote? I mean, that's the big question, Dennis. There is absolutely no doubt that, particularly in states that have, where you don't have to ask for a ballot, but you automatically receive a ballot, that ballots are going to be sent out to people who have died or who are people who have moved. That does not mean that the citizens of that state, Oregon is an example. I live in Oregon. I know that they do their very best to keep the list clean. But when Louise and I left Oregon, 10 years ago, and moved to Washington, D.C. for 7 years, we didn't tell Oregon we were gone. And I'm guessing that they probably sent a ballot to us the following year. Now, it probably got returned as undeliverable. And therefore they took us off the list. But, it might have been delivered to the people who've occupied the house that we sold. But, are they going to vote in my name and try to forge my signature to an envelope? Of course not. It's not going to happen. It's going to get thrown away. And that's the piece of the story that just doesn't get discussed. Trump and these other people go out and they say, oh, yeah, my dog got... this was what Jared Kushner was saying on TV over the weekend when he was on Jake Tapper's show, as I recall. And he was like, well, I've got two friends in New Jersey who both got a ballot that was skeezy somehow. It was for their dog or it was for somebody. And he says, no, I don't have that many friends in New Jersey. Well, the question is not did they get a ballot. That's sort of like, okay, I can drive by a voting location. The question is, do I park my car and go in and vote? Just because I'm able to drive by a voting location that's not the place where I normally vote. I might be able to vote a second time if I go to that place, right? No, people don't do that. And, just think about it for a moment and you get how crazy this is. Anyhow, Eugene in Chicago. Hey, Eugene, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon. I believe two measures should be taken to begin to address police and state-sponsored terror against the black community. The first is, I believe, the police department should be racially segregated. I don't believe that white people, by and large, because there are exceptions, and Jane Elliott comes to mind, have the cultural competence or the sensitivity to have the decision power to decide whether we live or die. Second, after the police department has been segregated racially, I believe police officers should come from the communities that they patrol. It's a different relationship when you know the police officers and they know you and they know your family circumstances. What do you think?
Excuse me. I think looking at 40 plus years of science on this, that one of the things we know is that when people live and work in an integrated environment, they become radically more racially tolerant. So I agree with you that police should be coming from the community. Pardon me. But I think that segregating the police would make things worse. You would end up with basically, the Nazi police and the black police. I mean, the white supremacy would go on steroids.
But you'd have the Nazi police in the white community.
I know.
Their terror up on us. Now, you all
I'm not disputing that.
Nazi and the authoritarian, but we don't want them to continue to heap terror unchecked upon us. We know that the real Nazis have infiltrated the police department.
I get it, and I agree with everything you said, Eugene, except the part about the segregation. We'll be back. I think we need to be integrating our police forces.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Aggressively integrating our police forces. But, I'm not a cop. What do I know? It's 15 minutes past the hour. I guess really what I should have said was, I'm not black, what do I know? I mean, I just can't imagine. Well, I can't imagine, but I'm certain I don't feel it the way that I would if it were real. Having a police department constantly coming after me because of the color of my skin. Scott in Portland. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Last night watching the RNC, the first couple speakers I found kind of interesting and telling because there was a lot of people I didn't know, and they're all singing praises and got this and got that. And then we got to Matt Gaetz and Gates, and I expected to see a Nazi flag unfurled behind him. He's kind of like Tom Cotton. He's ignore these guys at your own peril because. By the time he's done, you go back and listen to it, he gets, it turns into this call for action. Basically, he's saying, if we lose, we have nowhere to go. There's nothing if we don't win. We have to stand up. It was drawing battle lines. It was really pretty remarkable.
Well, they can do what the old Nazis did. They can all go to Brazil. Maybe.
Yeah, and I think that's probably part of their playbook because that's what they're doing. But there's everything these guys do. It's so mobbed up. You just got to look at it through the lens of a mob family and a mob organization. It's so telling, and I think you should subtitle your show. You could subtitle your show "What a Day," and maybe add a palm slap to the forehead or something, because these are strange times.
They are. We're living through historic times, Scott. These are there will be history books written about this year, and it's important, I think, for us to not only assess it in that context, but also to speak out and be agents of change in the context of it. Scott, thank you. Thank you for the call. Yeah, I was pretty flipped out by Matt Gaetz last night, too. Gwendolyn in Rialto, California. Hey, Gwendolyn, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I was just thinking, since you had that psychiatrist on and talking about the unfit Donald Trump, I know a while back they talked about he was on Adderall. Is that a true fact, number one? And if it is, what side effects, and have they even evaluated that into his behavior?
Well, there's a guy who worked on the Celebrity Apprentice shows that Trump had on NBC for 14 years, I think, and he has said publicly on numerous occasions that he watched Donald Trump and people around him snorting cocaine and snorting Adderall, which is a drug that's given for ADHD and for narcolepsy and things like that. Adderall is a combination of 3 different amphetamines. Dexamphetamine, methamphetamine, and just pure amphetamine. Wow. And each one lasts a different period of time, and each one takes effect at a different rate. But basically, it's like street cocaine, snorting Adderall. And I mean, it's really, really serious, potent stuff. And he's of the opinion that Trump is still doing that. I don't know if a 70-some-odd-year guy can safely snort Adderall. I mean, that seems to me like a prescription for a stroke. But on the other hand, I've noticed that when Trump walks, he's kind of dragging his left foot. And I'm thinking he had a stroke, and that's why he went to Walter Reed. And,
Right.
he's only slightly physically impaired from it, and perhaps slightly mentally impaired, who knows. But Adderall is nasty stuff, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's still taking it. People who do that tend to sniff a lot, and Trump does that from time to time. Gwendolyn, thanks for the call. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. So if you are a middle class, working class, whatever you want to call it, person in the United States, and you own your own home, which is, I believe, a little over 60% of American families, every year you pay a wealth tax. You pay a tax on what is, for the vast majority of Americans, their largest single asset. Your single largest asset, your home. It's called a property tax, but it's a tax you pay on wealth every year. You got a house worth $100,000, you pay a 1% property tax, you're going to pay $1,000 a year. Whatever it may be. I mean, and property tax is very typically higher than 1%. So why is it that if working class people are paying a wealth tax every year on their principal assets, why aren't billionaires paying a tax on their principal assets? Well, California's fixing to change that, or maybe, and I've got a piece up over at thomhartmann.com about it. You can check it out. Thom Hartmann here with you. There is a Miles Taylor. He testified about this last week, but this is a brand new story. Just came out today over at the Daily Beast. Rick Wilson and Mary Jong Fask writing about this. And it is that Taylor has expanded on this. He was the guy who told us that there were meetings of Trump's cabinet where Trump came in and said, basically tear the immigrant kids, the children of the families who are seeking refugee status, tear them away from their parents. The rationalization for this, John Kelly actually said this out loud, that the rationalization for it is that if families south of the border learn that if they come here, their children will be in hell. Their children will be thrown into jails. Their children will be put in cages. Their children could be sold into child trafficking networks. If they know that, now Kelly didn't use the example of sold into child trafficking networks, but we've got over 1,000 of these children who are missing right now. We have no idea where they are. The Trump administration, at the same time that QAnon is talking about, Democrats being, pedophiles who drink the blood of children and stuff. The Republican administration has actually been shoveling these kids out the door, and we don't know to whom. Maybe somebody running a child racket out of Mar-a-Lago. We don't know. But anyhow, this guy, Miles Taylor, who was the chief of staff for the Department of Homeland Security, the chief of staff, has expanded on what he originally said. He said Trump proposed, quote, sickening, end quote, medieval punishments to, quote, pierce the flesh of migrants who cross the border, rip immigrant families apart, quote, maim or gas them. Gas them? Does he mean like with Zyklon B? Or is he talking about tear gas? I don't know. Taylor said he dutifully took notes of the president's cruel and volatile suggestions. He said, and I quote, this is from the former chief of staff of the Department of Homeland Security. Quote, this is a man with no humanity whatsoever. He says, we got to do this, this, and this, all of which are probably impossible, illegal, unethical. He looks over at me and he goes, you effing taking notes? And then even on top of that, Taylor says the president couldn't go through a meeting, quote, without him doing 20 tangents, becoming irascible, turning red in the face, demanding a Diet Coke, spewing spit. Taylor said, literally out of G-damn nowhere, he'd be like, you know who's just my favorite guy? That My Pillow guy. Do you have any of those pillows? it must be a real challenge to work in this White House with this man, with Donald Trump. I mean, this is over the top, shall we say. Anyhow, Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I have a real issue with the Republican Party trotting out black people, I guess, for
Tim Scott
show
last
or
night.
for decoration. Yes, and Herschel Walker also. Tom, by no means, as black people, we're not monolithic in our thinking or our political persuasion. But what we know is this, that the Democratic Party, Tom, and I don't always agree with them, but certainly if we want to move them in a progressive direction, we're able to do that with the party. Right now, Trump is representing the party of hate. And it was really just frustrating and disgusting to see the presentation of the speakers and offering nothing. So here's what we leave them with. As they told the Obama supporters, remember, Tom, they told us we were drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm just going to ask the Trump supporters, stop drinking the bleach. Stop drinking the disinfectant. So you feel free to use it.
Hey, North Texas is asking them that, Pam. They got 60 people up there, or 50 some odd people who've been drinking bleach, and they're begging them to stop because it's killing them.
So I'm just simply saying, stop drinking the bleach. And so we're organizing, and we're going to just get out the vote. And as I said, Tom, the Democratic Party is not perfect, but we can push them in a direction where we want to go. And I'm ecstatic about Senator Harris, and I want to see her as VP.
Me too. And I'm guessing, in our lifetimes, Pam, God willing, we might see her as president as well, 4 years down the road. Or maybe 8 years, I don't know. Joe Biden has said he might run for re-election, but I'm not believing it.
And we've got to get out there and vote, Tom, so check your registration, plan to vote, do it early. I know people, Tom, including elders in my family, if they have to go out in person and vote, they will, Tom. They'll double mask up and protect themselves.
Yep, our parents' generation, Pam, volunteered to fight fascists in Europe knowing they could die. We can. I'm not suggesting that people should, take unnecessary risk, but, it would be a real challenge. But I think that, there are a lot of people signing up for this. Pam, thank you very much.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls after this. What are your thoughts if you watched the RNC last night, or just, if you've read about it? Where do you think this is going?
Our book for today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Collusion, How Trump Betrayed America. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly, also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, Hitler called to president. That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations. Never again. Each time, never again had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler, Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Brüning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved, then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
On this week's Science Revolution, Ethan Manuel with Sierra Club's Land Protection Program is here on Trump greenlighting drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Will the oil companies show up? Adrian Shelley with Public Citizen is dropping by on the methane rule rollback. and the Trump administration's continued assault on our climate. Lori Lotas with Climate Power 2020 is excited about Biden and Harris painting a bold climate action plan with clean energy jobs. Plus, in geeky science, there's a new study out. Do plant-based meats improve your heart? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. So the time for us to all start chanting, remember the Hindenburg? Although I don't think there's probably anybody alive today who actually remembers the Hindenburg. But, you know, it was back in the day, this giant Graf Zeppelin, what we might call a blimp that was filled with hydrogen gas, caught on fire. Oh, the humanity. Well, on the line with us is Bradley Marshall, the staff attorney with Earth Justice's Florida office. earthjustice.org is the website. The Twitter handle is @EarthJustice. And Bradley, tell us about these bomb trains. You know, we've had concern for years about radioactive material being shipped in trains, gasoline and other volatile compounds. But this is gas, as in gaseous gas?
Not quite, because what they do is they liquefy the gas by dropping the temperature to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit and then compressing it to 600 times. So it's 1/600th of its gaseous form into a liquid. And so all that energy and all that gas is in a compressed form in a tank car.
So what happens when, these tank cars are giant things and they're rolling down the tracks at 60, 70, 80, sometimes 100 miles an hour with lots and lots of vibration and going on and things. What happens if one of the seals starts to crack or an overflow or they've got to have some kind of safety valves and those things fails? What happens when that gas starts to rapidly depressurize and turn from a liquid state into a gaseous state?
Well, if that happens and the pressure relief valves fail, the pressure inside will actually just explode the car, and what is known as a boiling liquid vaporization explosion, and can cause enormous damage. But there are more concerns than just that. Yes, if you just have the car sit there, eventually it will explode if the pressure relief device doesn't work. But if these cars derail or should otherwise leak, it can have catastrophic consequences if the now boiling natural gas methane is able to be ignited and explodes.
We have seen, I think probably everybody at some point or other in their lives has seen a movie where, there's a gas leak in a house and, somebody lights a cigarette or, flips a light switch and boom, the house explodes. That would be an amount of gas equal to, I'm assuming if it was liquefied, probably less than a cup of liquefied natural gas would be enough to blow up a house. Am I estimating this correctly? And if so, how do we extrapolate that to a railroad car full of this stuff?
You're absolutely right. A railroad car full of this stuff, if that railroad car was to leak into a stormwater or sewer system, because of the confined nature of such systems, it could be enough to one tank car could be enough to destroy an entire city if it leaked in the right place and it ignited. Let alone the unit trains are talking about of over 100 tank cars as a possibility.
And if one of those tank cars goes up, it's going to be like the blasting cap that takes the rest of them out. So where are these cars? Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? What do we know about this?
Well, that's the thing, is that there hasn't been much demonstrated market need. What we think is that the railroads want to do this as to create more customers, and as a way of sort of, over the last few years, the environmentalists and others have been standing up against pipelines as doubling down unnecessarily on a fossil fuel future that none of us want. And so I think they're starting to think that these rail cars can basically act as a pipeline, as a way of bypassing any system constraints.
Well, they do that with oil.
Yeah, exactly.
But oil is not as explosive as compressed natural gas. You're talking about a can of gasoline versus a box of dynamite.
Pretty much, and then if oil, if it leaks, it just sits there. with liquefied natural gas, if it leaks, it's going to quickly boil off, but boiling off means it's going to be above negative 260. It's still going to freeze anything in sight until it can warm up to ambient temperatures. And because it's so cold, it will be heavy and sink to any lower spots. And so it can travel quite far depending on what the terrain is.
Wow. So if I understand correctly what you're saying, we're talking with Bradley Marshall, staff attorney with Earth Justice's Florida office. earthjustice.org is the website. So if I understand correctly what you're saying, Bradley, these train cars do not yet exist, but the railroad lobbyists are trying to get regulation put into federal law for them so that they can exist. And because they would be considered regulated, local communities, for example, or states can't stop them from coming through. Do I have that right?
Pretty much. Originally, what the DOT was proposing to do and what the railroads wanted was to use an existing 50-year-old designed rail car, which does not have a great safety history. And this is what they said has an excellent safety history. But as the National Transportation Safety Board pointed out in their comments, there's only 67 of these cars in existence, and of those, 3 of them derailed, and when they derailed, 2 of them just breached immediately, and the other had to be breached by emergency responders. So these things do not have a history of being able to maintain their content safely. And so what in the final rule, the one that we're challenging, they have required a new tank car with a slightly thicker shell. But they have provided no data, and there's no reason to think that the slightly thicker shell is going to be able to withstand any kind of high-speed impact. And its ability to withstand any kind of low impact is probably only marginally better than the existing tank cars.
Amazing. And this is all being promoted by Elaine Chao's Department of Transportation. She of the, hundreds of millions of dollars of net worth out of this Taiwanese shipping company. Is this just a grift to make money? I mean, is that what's going on here?
I mean, the railroads and the fossil fuel industry is always looking to make money, and so I think that's certainly their interest here.
Amazing stuff. We're talking with Bradley Marshall of earthjustice.org. Are you guys launching, let me rephrase that. I realize you're launching, legal challenges against this. What about the public? Are you looking for public help on this?
Certainly, I think writing your congressman, writing your senators is always good. Congress can override under the Congressional Review Act rules that come out of DOT, or just write a new law that says you shall not transport LNG by rail. Mm-hmm. There's already been we've been hearing things out of the House that they want to take some kind of action, but it's certainly an uphill battle, and I wouldn't have much hope with our current Senate.
Remarkable stuff. Bradley Justice, staff attorney with Earth Justice Florida's office, earthjustice.org, and you can tweet at Earth Justice. Bradley, thanks so much for dropping by. It's good talking with you.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, have a great afternoon. Wow. Amazing story. Let's see here. Richard in Little Rock, Arkansas says you disagree with me, Richard. What's up?
Well, what I haven't heard enough and nobody talk about, given that incident in Wausau, if you just look at it early on, right there at the beginning, if the young man had just cooperated, had been alive, it goes to the old phrase, cut off your nose to spite your face. What happened,
Richard, if the police had simply used appropriate force to stop him, he would still be alive. Shooting somebody 7 times in the back because they're ignoring your command to stop is, particularly when they're getting into a car with 3 children, is frankly insane.
Excuse me,
There is
Tom,
no justification for that.
You're correct, but I want to go back to the very beginning, right at the very beginning, and remember the phrase, cut off your nose to spite your face. He was correct. He shouldn't have been treated the way he was. He shouldn't probably have been even approached the way he was. But if he had
Then let's just stop that right there, Richard, because the subtext of what you're saying is if he had just acted like a good black person, or if he had just acted like a good frightened American, if he had just acted like a good supplicant, if he had just laid down and begged the police to be nice to him, he would still be alive. I'm not buying it, and that's not how Americans should be.
I agree with you, Tom. That's not the way we should be, and we need to change it. We need Biden. We need to reform police, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about right now. Every instance, you can go back and look. Had they just been, whatever you want to call it, supplement, that behavior, that type of behavior, would have saved their life, and perhaps eventually...
No, the behavior that would have saved their lives, Richard, is the police not pulling a trigger.
The problem is...
100% of the time, if the police had not pulled the trigger, the person would still be alive.
And
Let's
we would have been
keep
better
the responsibility where it is.
And we've been better off if people hadn't voted for Trump. Tom, we're talking about people. You can't.
Yeah, okay. I get it, Richard. I get it. Richard, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. I don't know. Sometimes I just scratch my head up. The inability of folks to understand the circumstances of somebody else who lives a life that they have not lived. Anyway, we'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. And welcome back. Ozzy in Quail Valley, California. Hey, Ozzy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm concerned that I'm not hearing enough conversation on the sociopathic problems that Trump has. And what are we going to do to prevent this from happening in the future?
It's a good question. I think that, once burned, twice shy. I mean, we now have an understanding of how important it is to take demagogues at their word, but Trump has created a new front, as it were, in American politics that had always been very, very small and very marginalized, even in the 30s when Charles Lindbergh was leading the crusade, to back Hitler. He's a good guy, right? And there's a great movie about that on HBO, by the way. I don't know. There's not a simple answer.
I think the simple answer is they should be screened and vetted like everybody else is getting.
Well, that's what elections are supposed to do, Ozzy. I mean, here's the problem.
Well, it doesn't,
if you were to pass a law, now let me just finish here. If you were to pass a law today that said that anybody who wants to run for president of the United States has to submit to a psychological profile, and that's the law, that would be administered by the executive branch of our federal government, which means that Joe Biden would have to take a psychological test administered by somebody appointed by Donald Trump. How do you think that test would turn out?
Well, he's already elected at that point. I think he's already elected.
No, but Biden's not. He's the candidate. But my point is that
will be elected
that's the kind of thing that could be used for partisan gain, and that's my concern. I don't want the federal government to have that kind of power.
Well, I just hate for this to happen again, and it will.
Me too. I think if you want to put the blame someplace, I put it with the media. I put it with, Joe Scarborough's show that had Donald Trump on day after day after day, month after month after month, Fox so-called News and Rupert Murdoch, the president of CBS, Les Moonves, saying, Donald Trump may be terrible for America, but he's making money for CBS. Keep it going, Donald. I mean, these guys brought Donald Trump into our living rooms day after day after day. They didn't push back on the crazy part of his message. They amplified some of the parts of his message that were patently BS, where he was just lying to us. He's going to bring back the jobs. He's going to make America great again, all this kind of stuff. And here we are. And it's because there were a bunch of executives in a bunch of corporate boardrooms who ran media companies who wanted to make more money off selling more advertising by getting more eyeballs by putting a freak show on TV. Frankly, I think that's where we should be focusing our attention. And I think Brian Stelter's new book, Hoax, speaks to this in a way that is pretty important to understand. But I don't think that we can test our way out of this, Ozzy. We've got to, the American people have to get honest information.
It would have been so easy to vet Trump and never, ever let him run for office.
Yeah, well, we should have been listening to people like...
I don't know how they get that kind of power, but...
Yeah, the guy who authored his, who ghost wrote his autobiography. His name is escaping me, but in fact, he's been on this program. But, there were people who were saying back in the day, look out, this guy is nuts. Look out, this guy's a fascist. Look out, this guy's a racist. And, the media said, we're not going to listen to those voices. Well, here we are. We'll be back. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, what a day, huh? Allison in Martinez, California. Hey, Allison, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Hey.
What's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah. Well, I go to bed and wake up the last few days thinking about the post office situation. And I'm realizing that listening to some of the, House questioning, that their questions are far too narrow. They're focusing on what, that he has no background in the post office, but not focusing on the experience that he does have. And part of that entails, by the way, paying $38 million in the last 5 years for employment-related offenses and government contracting violations. But by the way,
really,
so the question I have, because, like I said, it's keeping me up at night. So I've been digging into not only XPO logistics, but, a little bit other stuff, too. And so now that Congress has passed a $25 billion bill for the post office, who's going to oversee the procurement of replacing the government property that DeJoy trashed? Well, surprise, surprise, XPO Logistics, which is the company that he's the chairman of and owns $50 million in stock of, not only do they produce the hardware, which is the sorting machines, but also the software, which has proprietary programming titled XPO Smart, which does predictive analytics and customer trend algorithms. But they also do the data hosting, which means they can access the data. And of those 671 sorting machines, to replace those at, let's say $300,000 each, which is what I found that they probably cost, that's going to be a $200 million contract that someone gets awarded, not even including the hosting costs. And the other question I have is what happened to the e-waste when they took those machines out? Like, where did the software, logistics, and data go? Well, another surprise, the VP at XPO owns a waste management conglomerate, and XPO specializes in reverse logistics. Well, what does that mean? They're, able to harvest the customer data, and does that mean they're eventually going to be able to figure out whether you're Republican or Democratic based on the type of subscriptions, like mail subscriptions you have? I mean, it seems really, really dangerous, and Congress does not seem to be digging into what XPO Logistics actually is.
Wow. I didn't know half of what you just said, Allison, and I'm pretty well informed. Any links that you've got to any of that?
I'm willing to send it to you if you'd like to take a look at it.
Yeah, please do so. Please do so. The easiest way to get data to me is to tweet it to me. But if it's more complex than that, I'm going to put you on hold here, and Joyce will talk to you about how to reach me. Thank you very much for the call. This is mind-boggling. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I'm
Good.
Almost flipped out.
By the way, hang on just a second, Michael. I see Joyce hasn't picked up the... Joyce, Allison's on line 5. You can pick her up. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, sir. I almost slipped out an earlier call, and it ties into what I was about to say. This whole notion of law and order being spewed out by Trump and these Republicans in the RNC, bunch of nonsense when they are forever foes of the Constitution, forever foes of the judiciary that rightfully rule against them, and so many simple issues that you can't tiptoe around. We're all bound by the same laws, the same Constitution that calls for equality. And the whole thing is without the Constitution, without the judiciary, there is no law and order, period. And it goes right to the shooting of that black man by the cop. First off, I don't even recall if there was any order given by the cop, but just going to shoot him in the back. Any and every right-winger that dares to say if the black man done what the cop had said, he would still be alive or not shot. I have two words, and you can write this down if you like, Tom. Philando Castillo. Does that name ring a bell?
Right. Yeah, the guy who had the wallet in his hand, yeah. Oh, no, I'm thinking
he complied.
Yeah.
He complied with the cops' order, and he still got shot dead. So spare me with the
in the
nonsense,
back,
right-wingers. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you, Michael. I'm absolutely with you. Thank you for the call. Dan in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How's it going? So I just wanted to make a quick little point. We have a 74-year-old and a 77-year-old running for president. I was a Bernie supporter. I'm aware of his age as well. But it's time for the younger generation to start taking over and taking things a little bit more serious. And that's what really gets to me is that, AOC was put on 90 seconds by 89-year-old Nancy Pelosi. This older generation is trying to cling to power, and it's going to make things worse. And I don't want me to say
for what it's worth, Dan, Nancy Pelosi wasn't programming the Democratic Convention, but your point is well taken. Don't you think that young people might have a lot more say in the Democratic Party if they turned out to vote in reasonable numbers?
Definitely, but you have to also think about the kind of jobs.
Or is there a chicken-egg problem here, that they're not showing up to vote because they feel like they're not represented?
Well, our jobs that my generation are pretty much taking right now are jobs that are, they're not normal 9-to-5 jobs. These are service jobs. These are Uber jobs. These are just, these jobs that don't have set times. And I think that makes it a really hard for kids to even get rides to the polls and or get off because
there's only a couple of states, Dan, where you can't just request an absentee ballot and handle it via the mail when you're not working. Even
Definitely,
if you're working 3 jobs, you could take 5 minutes before you go to bed.
Right. Well, I'm 35, and I just voted absentee for the first time for my primaries in Pennsylvania this year. So I wasn't even really aware of that in my sphere. But yeah.
Right. So let's wake folks up. Dan, thanks for the call. I'm with you. I want to see a more multi-generational Democratic Party. I want to see more young people stepping up and taking the reins. I've been a political activist literally since I was 16 years old. I think that I know that there's a new generation coming up, and they're really wired in. They understand what's going on in ways that a lot of us never did, particularly with issues that, the whole broad spectrum of issues from race to war. I think it's a good thing that young people are getting involved. I want more of them. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Mark Pocan will be with us to start the show. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these 2 great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it.
We say fight back!